everyone. It's February 18th, 2020. It's Tuesday. It's Harp Tuesday. And in this episode, I'm going to be looking at some 8-note chord progressions. And I'm not sure that I've covered this specific topic before. That I've certainly talked about 4-note chords and chord progressions. And that was the opening to the first of Nodermann's 7 sonatas. I've been looking at that with several of my students and just thought it would be a good topic because it starts out with these 5 E-flat chords. There's a lot of notes, right? We're finding a lot of notes, but they're all just an E-flat chord, different shapes in this progression up. And so it's really very helpful and very handy to be able to do something like that automatically. I was also thinking about this topic because I don't have the music handy, but one of the pieces I'm working on for an orchestra gig at the moment has a bunch of similar sort of arpeggios. And again, it becomes really easy to play if your hands automatically find those shapes. So that's what we're talking about is just ways to work on being able to make that automatic, right? And in many ways on the harp, we get a little bit spoiled in that with scales, one size fits all. We don't have to practice different fingerings for different keys. And with chord progressions, in a sense, one size fits all. We always do these 3 shapes, right? There's the root position 4-note shape, where we have an extra gap between 1 and 2. First inversion, extra gap between 2 and 3. And second inversion, extra gap between 4 and 3. And then back to root. But this is a case, I think, where it is worthwhile to practice not just one particular key. So maybe you get used to being able to do a C progression. But here we do have the sort of the reference points of the colored strings that makes it different. Even though it's the same shape, it's a little bit different, say, to be doing a chord progression. Or a G, maybe a G minor or G major, doesn't matter. And so here it is, I think, worth doing all the different keys. So let's start just by kind of looking at what's going on here, right? So a chord, a typical chord, and the chords that we're doing here, is made up of 3 notes. So this E flat is E, G, B, E, G, B, E, G, B. And if only we could make it so that all the strings on the harp disappear except for E's, G's, and B's, then it would be really simple because it would be as if we're finding a scale, right? It's all the notes that make up this E chord in a row, these 4 in a row, and the next one, what's the next note that's part of an E chord? It's this G, and etc. as we go on up. And so that ability then to make it as if the only strings that exist are the ones that are part of an E chord, in this case. Or as if maybe the other strings are there, but these ones have lit up and everything else has kind of disappeared. Because then this next set of notes, right, it's just starting on the G and again just playing notes that are part of that E chord. So that's one way to think about it. You can also think about the shapes. So we start with a root here and a first inversion here, and that's one of the things that makes a 4/8-note chord progression a little more challenging than a 3-note chord progression. So with a 3-note, both hands say have root, first, second, root. They get to find both the same shapes. Here we're finding different shapes, so we want it to as if it's one big hand, right? Even though separate hands, that we find this one E chord. So root and a first inversion. Left hand's then going to find a first inversion. Right hand's going to go up to second, and root. And now those are the only 3 combinations we have, because now we're back to root. Same as down here, and that means we'll have a first inversion up here. So you can think about that intellectually, and that's good to be aware of, right? But I also think this is a case where, as well as being aware of that, You just have to put in the time, right? The time and practice so that the hands start to find those shapes automatically. So one way to do that, of course, is to practice the hands separately to make sure that you can you do a fluid chord progression with a single hand. And then you can practice, for example, getting from this, say root and first inversion, this shape here, to the next shape. And it's interesting, right, because the left hand's going to find what the right hand has, just an octave lower. And so just practicing, first of all, maybe just practicing finding 8 notes fluidly so that it starts to feel as if, this, and especially if I'm going up, I'm thinking I'm starting from the bottom note in the sense I'm thinking about the left hand and the right hand is automatically falling into place. Certainly in this little sequence, my vision and my focus is on the left hand and the right hand's falling into place. So we want finding these 8 notes to feel as easy as, say, finding a root position 3-note chord is. Just so automatic, right? That boom, we find these and there we are. So practicing that, say, practicing this shape, the 3 shapes, practicing a transition. And it might be that it takes you a while to get set. Check, okay, yes, these are all parts of an E chord. Maybe you have to really think left hand, right hand. Yes, there we are. And again, this is a case of time, right? It's a lot of notes to find, a lot of fingers are involved. But eventually, being able to have that fall into place. Another nice practice is to go a nice little arpeggio on that progression, right? So that you're starting with the left hand, getting ready to find this next one. We can't find it too early because both fingers are on that G chord. So of course, we can do the same thing going down. It's also, in terms of these 4-note chords and looking at the music, it's worth being aware of and trying to instantly recognize, is it a root position shape, is it a first inversion shape, or is it a second inversion shape, right? Is it this, or is it this, extra gap here, or is it this? All right, so this, or this, or this. It's also worth being aware of, so we're talking now about these sort of 8-note chords where they follow up all the notes in that chord in a row. But if we have, say, a root position E here, and we've located that, and on the music we see that we're playing a 4-note chord in the right hand, and it starts on, let's say, a B, there's a very good chance that it's going to be this chord, because that would also be part of an E chord. And it's wonderful if that can start to be automatic as well, that our hands develop that intelligence of knowing, oh, we found this root A and we're starting on a C. It's probably this. Just that interconnectivity of the 2 hands. And again, I think it's worth doing each key in this case. Again, we don't have to do that for scales. We don't have to do that for a lot of technique, but these chord progressions, I think it is helpful to do that for each note in the scale. There are 7 days of the week, 7 strings per octave, not counting the octave higher. So you might say, okay, first day of the week, I'm going to do some C chord progressions. It's going to be C minor in this case. Next day, do some D. Let's do a D major. Even though it's very awkward up there, and sorry, that high F is new, it's quite out of tune. Next day, do some E chords. F, move to F minor, etc. So that by the end of the week, you're on B, and you start the week, next week, back on C again, just so you get used to the different visual of each chord progression. And again, I think the biggest thing to remember on these is time, that especially initially, they may be a little bit challenging, but they're so useful to have the fingers and the hands start to automatically be able to do that. So I just highly recommend that as a part of your practice regime. So hope that was interesting, hope that was useful, and I will see you in 2 weeks' time. Cheers.